Welcome to this week's edition of the Rock and Roll Ghost podcast. This week we have singer, songwriter, guitarist Glen Phillips. You may know him from his solo career or from his days still in Toad the Wet Sprocket, the alternative hit makers from the 90s. Glen, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. How are you?
Thank you. Doing okay, thanks.
Good. So you had an solo album come out semi recently and you were touring behind it, but now you guys in Toad are gearing up to go on tour. How is it to switch gears like that from doing your thing to doing the band thing?
I mean, it's normal at this point. I've been doing the solo thing for 20 years and Toad tours pretty much every year. I tour every year. So it's just, season shift and do something different. I like the change between the two. I think going out and doing my own stuff helps me really appreciate Toad, and getting together with Toad gets me ready to go out and do my own thing again. So I like the change.
Yeah. Now, I mean, if you think about it, back in the day, like Toad was around, like the idea of doing a solo album for the most part was meant the band was over, I mean, like Sting and people like that. But now people realize you could kind of, you got do all sorts of things a lot. It's one thing about modern music, the modern music field that's kind of freeing in one way is that bands have learned, number one, how to communicate with each other to some degree.
Or they've just decided to never learn and let it be.
Right. But that's there now, which never was before, so a lot of bands, and I'm not saying this is what happened with Toad, but just, a lot of bands just couldn't deal with each other anymore. And they saw no outs, they just blew up the whole thing. But also this idea that you can keep the band going and still everybody can do side projects, and it's a lot freer now. The downside is that there's a lot less money, in it for everyone.
That's true. I wish we had done side projects for a while instead of breaking up back in the day. I think we could have done well with a moderator, a mediator, and a break, but we did it the other way, for good or for ill. But yeah, I also think just the idea of collaboration, I think it's really healthy for people in a band to do things outside the band, because you can start to see your internal culture as, the way things work. And then you walk into a different group of people and you realize you can do things a different way,
right,
or contribute in a different way. You can be recognized for creative contributions that you weren't recognized for in the band. And you can also find out where you've gone complacent in a band and where you need to build skill. And whether that's instrumentally, musically, or interpersonally. There's a ton to be learned by working with other people. I think it's I think it's a pretty vital thing, actually, to keep a band healthy, especially these days.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's just it's amazing the differences. You think about all these bands that broke up because they couldn't stand each other anymore, and so oftentimes you just need some damn time away from each other.
Well, yeah, or you play with other people and you have a new slate and you're able to play with somebody else, and sometimes you go like, wow, this guy's amazing, and they're a little like, I'm glad I'm not in a band forever with it. Like, it doesn't happen much, but it can really help you realize everyone's different, everyone's chewing on their own stuff, everyone's trying to learn, and it can also show you that things you've become acclimated to in terms of how people relate are ridiculous. Yeah. And, just that it's like, there's this argument we always get into. There's no argument, that we're not even disagreeing on anything. It's just a habit, and it can help you step outside of it.
I get you. What for you has been the biggest change? I mean, you signed to Columbia pretty early on. You started the band around 15, and then you signed around 17, 18 to Columbia.
Yeah, we signed when I was 18. I mean, it's hard to say what's probably the biggest change in my life is that my kids are all in their 20s and out, and spread around. And I got divorced 10 years ago. I'm gonna be getting married again this year.
Oh, congratulations.
So huge life changes.
Yeah.
And even when you're talking about side projects, it's like I had 3 kids back in the day. I was so even the idea of side projects, I would get home and I would just be Mr. Dad. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't,
Yeah.
I didn't want to do a side project. I wanted to be with my kids.
Right.
So, now there's a lot more free time. I think the hardest adjustment of my life, honestly, is coming home and not having my children,
Yeah.
because it was there's something about like being in the studio or being on the road. You know what you have to do every day. And I can tell this story that I'm not a very disciplined person,
Mhm.
but on the road, I've never missed a show in 35 years. And I have sung through great illness. When you're on the road, you got to wake up, you got to do the drive, you got to get in, you got to sound check, you got to get something to eat eventually, play the show, settle the show, sell them. It's like go to sleep and do it again the next day. It's kind of grueling. And then these days I get home and it's like, I don't know what to do with myself. I used to have these, I started being a father when I was 25. So I would get home and it's like, okay, I'm going to get up. I'm going to go for a walk with the kid. I'm going to let my wife sleep in. I'm going to make a breakfast. I'm going to take the kid, it's like, there's all this, kids just fill your life. And now I come home and it's like, what do I got to do today? Oh, I should write the best song I've ever written. That's what I should do today. I'll just procrastinate a little on that. And so,
Yeah, the thing is like even when you're not on, even when you're not whatever, touring or whatever, you still technically have a job. I mean, granted, the hours are a little bit more lax because you're in charge, but
yeah. So I end up doing, different things. I do community choir leading when I'm at home. I started doing a ton of live casts during lockdown. I was doing like 5 live casts a week. Basically, I was doing a Zoom choir, 3 free live casts on social media, and then a stage at concert for about 18 months straight. And so I learned more songs and played more guitar than I ever have in my life during that time. But it's being a creative is interesting. And there's also simply I think one of the necessities, I've been thinking a lot more about it. We have this Rilke quote on our wall here that it's something like like the highest requirement of relationship is to guard one another's solitude. It's a quote from Rilke, and that, creativity comes out of silence. It doesn't come out of, once again, I'm a podcast addict. I have this attention grabbing device in my pocket all the time. And I suck in a lot of, too much information, and creativity comes out of silence. Creativity comes out of time when it's just my thoughts get to go somewhere. But I've always been like feast or famine. I take in a lot. I get a set of concepts that I want to address, and then I have a writing season where it all kind of gets digested and the ideas attach themselves to songs. So
yeah, I gotta say this as somebody that writes myself, the worst thing for me is that I don't sit there and quiet myself or my surroundings until I'm ready to go to sleep. And the trouble with that is that's when, like, if I'm writing, if I'm thinking about a script I wrote or a new idea for a script or something like that, that's when the stuff comes to me. And it's like I'm trying to go to sleep.
Yeah, I do to do notes. Then for me, it's morning time is the time that is my best time, and also the time I've kind of lost. I like hanging out in bed and having coffee with my with my partner. Just like that's a sweet way to spend the morning. And but that's the time probably when I'm the freshest, the ideas
Yeah.
can come out, when writing seems to work.
Okay. Yeah. Well, everybody has their own thing.
I am not a night owl. I'm like a
Yeah.
5 a.m.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have the wrong job.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. What was the biggest thing you learned when you were in Toad? You know, when the initial time you were in Toad. I mean, you said you signed the band, to Columbia when you were 18. For God's sake, I mean, even for rock and roll, that's young.
Yeah.
What were the major changes you and the guys probably went through from 1988 to 1998?
I mean, everything. That's such a general question. Like,
Yeah,
I had a career. I was, by when I was 27, the band had broken up. My dad had just died, and I couldn't get a record deal.
yeah,
And I had 2 kids at that time, and I was, I had a total depressive breakdown.
I can understand.
So there was that. I mean,
That,
that
that
was
that's a
by 27. Thank
Yeah,
God I wasn't an addict. But
yeah. The
it would have
music
ended.
industry is not an easy thing to deal with.
No, I wish I had had more psychological help earlier. I wish I had been more grateful. I wish I had had better financial mentorship.
Yeah,
And at a time when I was earning, I wish I would have acted more like I would never earn anything again, and made some better investments and been a little less risk averse. I also wish that I had sought better help with communication in the band so that we wouldn't have had to break it up, and could have created some opportunities. I also wish we had toured Europe more and built a career there. It makes me really sad that I don't have a career there.
now why would that
Mostly regrets.
not have happened?
Why would that not have happened?
Well, why wouldn't Toad go overseas? The management or the label or whatever just didn't think it was worth the time.
Yeah, that's a long story. But we dropped that ball
Yeah.
stupidly.
Um, have you done much touring in Europe though?
No, I've gone a couple times where I've just like put up a notice on Facebook, and basically like I had a little divorce, post-divorce solo Europe sadness tour.
Yeah, sounds like a
And
good place for it.
yeah, I just put up a thing on what do you call it?
I think you said,
Facebook,
yeah,
saying
Facebook,
like, I'm going to be in Europe. I was visiting, my daughter was doing a semester abroad in Rome.
yeah.
Like,
Okay.
I'm going to start in Rome. And where was I ending up? I was ending up, my friend Casey Turner and his friend Julian, basically I ended up going with a couple friends and he put together like a 5-date Ireland tour.
Okay.
Playing like coffee houses and hostels and stuff, and home concerts in Ireland. And so I'm like starting in Rome, I am ending in Dublin. Tell me where to go and I'll be there. And
Yeah.
so I got to, play a couple shows in Switzerland, little show in Italy. It was great. I had a
Yeah.
wonderful time. A show in outside of a couple shows in the Netherlands. There's a few places I can go and play a house concert, but there's no real, solidly built audience,
Well,
whereas
what was Toad's reception like overseas in like the UK and that? I don't really. I know some bands like from that era that definitely had an impact, but a little bit,
there was a little bit of it, but we never built it.
right. So you didn't build
You
right.
got to go back over and over and over
Yeah,
when you're
yeah,
young and don't need to make any money. And we didn't do the work.
yeah,
So you got to do the work. You got to follow it up.
yeah. There was something. I know it sounds vague, but it's like there was something very American sounding about Toad the Wet Sprocket. I think you guys could have
Yeah.
worked in the UK really well. I think that's a similar kind of vibe for back then. But yeah, I mean, if you don't do it, if you can't, if you don't have the opportunity to, were you just pressured to just go right in after Fear and make a new album?
No, we toured, we did 300 show. I mean, by the time we were done, we'd been on the tour for 18 months and we played 300 shows. So we needed a little break.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a long story.
No, I
For
get
Fear,
you.
we went back some, but we didn't keep it up and we didn't build it enough.
Yeah. No, I was more meaning just basically here in the States. You were touring and I was just curious about pressure just to get into the next record because Fear, I mean, was such a huge success. I mean, those songs, you know, were big chart, you know, chart toppers and everything.
Yeah, they definitely wanted us back in the studio and yeah.
How did you feel about the label's I guess interest or dealings with the band as time went on?
I mean, the label was great. You know, honestly, it was a really good time to be on a major label. We, up until the Coil album, we had like a small licensing fee for Bread and Circus and Pale because we pre-recorded them. And we made a deal. Our idea was we were going to get paid on the back end instead of the front end. So our advances were only for recording costs. They weren't for anything else. We didn't get like our rent paid from the record company. Our idea was we were going to earn it and that in return that the company would give us creative control. And so we made the albums we wanted to make, you know,
Right.
and even had like for Dulcinea, our A&R guy was Chuck Plotkin, you know, who produced like
Oh yeah.
Springsteen and Dylan. And he, you know, he would say things like, my job is to protect you from the radio guys. They want a product. I want a great album.
Yeah.
And you know, we played him all the mixes, you know, early mixes of the songs. And I remember he was like, wow, this is a wild stew. You can take people on a lot of journeys with this. Like, you got to ask yourself, like, what's the emotional ride you want to bring people on as they listen to the record? Like, he really believed in
Yeah.
records as art. So I mean,
Yeah,
that was our A&R
I
guy.
have to wonder how many A&R guys like him are even around anymore.
Oh, they all get fired.
Yeah. Well, it's just like because
But
that's just it's an antithetical approach for nowadays when everything's quarterly, you know, meets and all that stuff, you know.
yes, but I think the weird thing about today, though, is that every successful artist is an outlier. And I don't think that was the case back then.
Yeah.
Uh, like back then, I mean, there's a degree of that, but everybody at the time was signing indie bands, right? You know, it's like, okay, college bands, college music, it's the post-punk world. They hadn't even coined the alternative genre yet, right?
Yeah.
People were calling it postmodern, post-punk, college. You know, it was all in flux. Radio was deregulated.
Yeah.
And I mean, very quickly, you know, they call it indie promotion, but Payola found a way back in as quickly as they could make it happen because, you know, people like profiting off of other people's hard work.
Right.
But, you know, it's, you know, so I think we came in at a very lucky time where Columbia could afford to be very patient with us. We didn't
Right.
have to have a hit on our first two records. They let us go on the road. They let us learn how to tour and perform. They let us become a better band. Every town we went to with Columbia back in that day, there would be a retail person and a radio person and often also a college rep.
Right.
They ran us ragged with promo. We would be doing interviews in stores, college radio, commercial radio every day. And so, you know, there was this apparatus on the ground of people, and the locals were massive music fans. And so, you know, I have to say, we had a great experience. It changed on our last album on Coil because we took a big advance. And when you take a big advance, you have to act like you're there to win. And I talked about this in an interview yesterday, but there was this 90s idea where it's like, yeah, we're on a major label, but we're not sellouts, right?
Right.
Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, like, all these bands that were like, we hate the major labels, even though we're on one, right?
Yeah.
And we all had that attitude. Everybody out of that indie world was, we're on a major, but we're not a sellout. We don't want to play our single. We hate the radio, even though we're going to radio every day and we want them to play our, people aren't conflicted that way now.
Right.
Like, if you're putting out music, you want to have a hit. People are very clear about that.
Yeah.
And you can try to have a hit really being yourself and being, you can be Billie Eilish, which isn't like anything else out there, right? She created a thing. They've signed a ton of other artists that they're trying to make sound like Billie. That's where the quick A&R cycle comes in, is the copycats. And that happened too in the 90s. But I don't know. It was a strange time, and I think a unique one, where there was this kind of pretension to, you wanted to be cool and you wanted to be liked by cool people and real music fans, but you didn't want to be in the mainstream, except that you were, and then you had to pretend you didn't want to be.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear you. What was the feeling like when your first song got on the radio, or I mean, even further down the road, how successful the songs were?
It was pretty surreal.
Yeah.
I mean, is the best way to explain it. It was surreal, it was really weird when All I Want took off. And even in the audiences, I remember, there were people that the OG fans would be going off, wow, the All I Wanters, they're only here for one song, but it was kind of it was an amazing time too. I mean, all of a sudden we were, it just very surreal. It's hard for me, I see like, videos of us on Letterman, and it doesn't feel like me. It feels like someone else's life. It was a very long time ago. And it's a strange thing, to be in a band now that has this tie to people's pasts, right? And there were times where I really resented it, because I'm still a writer. That I think I'm more of a writer than anything else. And so being in a nostalgia band, forced to focus on material I wrote in my early 20s, I'm thinking like, I feel like I'm writing the best songs I've ever written. I like these songs, but I'm a little bit done with them. And, over time, getting past the resentment and realizing that those songs hit people at an important part in their life. They mean something to people. They're worth something to people. And just to appreciate them again, instead of like running away from them. It feels good to have a cleaner relationship.
Well, it's amazing. Like, you wrote a number of songs that impacted people on a massive level, and to have that is something truly extraordinary. I mean, people, writers and performers would kill to have something like that. And it just, I could totally see it. Remembering back at that time. I mean, I'm in my 50s now. It's like, everybody wanted success, but nobody wanted this, everybody wanted to act like they didn't want success. And, the biggest is somebody like Kurt Cobain, who went out of his way forever to get noticed, and then got consumed by actually getting noticed, in a lot of ways, and then acting like he didn't crave it to begin with. And, one of the more complex creatures of that era, for sure.
Well, and part of you craves it, and there's another part. Like, I'm really glad I had my family early in my life, that I, was with, my now ex-wife, but we were together since I was 18. I wasn't sledding around on the road. I wasn't rich enough to live, I stayed in Santa Barbara. I lived, I had kept my old friends. I kept my old, community. I had my checks and balances instead of going to LA and dating, models and actresses and other musicians and kind of getting lost in the circus. And I'm nothing, not that there's anything wrong with models and actors and musicians, but
no, there's a certain
I had a grounded
allure
life
that could change things.
Yeah, I had a grounded life. I mean, the strange thing I think is, once again, now still being an artist, still being somebody who writes and ponders and ponders and ponders, and plays music. It's just you can't compete with the past, and you can't compete with that. But it's a strange thing feeling like you're sometimes at war with the past,
right?
Or that the the signs of success, the external metrics are stacked in a way that kind of doesn't recognize the merits of maybe what you're doing in the now. And so ignoring those to continue to put out albums while ignoring the fact of, like, nobody's, not nobody's listening, but comparatively,
Yes, I get you.
It's a strange thing. And to be like, what, my success as a kid was an artifact of partially of the quality of the material, partially of how hard I worked, but more than anything, it was luck and youth and the ability to work that hard and go out, and the time that it happened.
Right.
And that right now, my luck is that I can make a living being a musician because of the 90s.
Right.
I would not be a musician if I didn't have that. And so it's important for me to remember that the reason I get to keep doing this and improving my craft and bringing music to people is because of that time. So I have to view that with a sense of gratitude, because it allows me to keep doing it. And whether or not it's in the mainstream anymore.
Right. Well, what is I just had a question that flew out of my head. I'll just ask you another question. I was thinking of it, then if it comes back to me. But what is touring like for you these days on your own? Do you mostly go out by yourself, or do you have a band with you, or
No,
how
I
does that
can't afford a
generally
band.
work?
I go out often solo. It depends. A lot of shows are just me. Sometimes I'll bring out my friend Jonathan Kingham, and he'll back me up and sometimes open for me. I did do a trio with Jonathan and Amber Rubarth like 6 or 8 years ago. Go out with friends like Garrison Starr, and she'll sing with me on some songs. And so it just depends. But
Mostly it's you and a guitar and a bag of clothes, right?
Mostly me, a guitar, and a bag of clothes. So yeah, I love it when I can have somebody out there with me to keep me company and take over the driving if my sciatica gets too nasty.
So you were really, I mean, you don't even have somebody out there like managing or anything. It's just
I
you.
don't have a manager. I have a booking agent. As a solo artist, that's all I have, is a booking agent.
Okay.
Right now I did put out my last record through Compass Records, and they've been great. But it's not a major label in the 90s. It's it's the modern the modern setup. So limited resources, and I'm a
but
dude in my
the good
50s
thing
making
nowadays
strange
is
music.
the good thing nowadays is the power of social media, stuff like Bandcamp, Instagram, what have you, is that you could get at least you could get yourself out there on your own easier than you couldn't do this in the 90s.
No, I don't know if that's entirely true.
Really?
I think, I mean, there aren't a lot of bands who did the regional model, but there are a number who did. I think of bands like the Samples out of Colorado,
Okay. Yeah, that's a good
like
example.
they did way better as an indie band than they did as a signed band. or thinking of bands like, you know, it's better, easier if you're a genre band like Fugazi,
Right.
you know, ferociously independent beginning to end. But they
Right.
also had, you know, the punk. If you knew what you were looking for in the world of punk, you would, you know, there's a
Yeah.
conversation among people, and those things definitely happened before the internet.
Yeah.
And so the thing with, you know, like any form of media or technology, social media rewards certain kinds of personality or skill set, and it rewards being good at social media, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah. Yeah.
reward making great music, rewards being good at social media.
Right.
And that's its own
Yes.
skill set, which I do not possess, nor do I
Right.
want to. I mean, one of the things in my life right now is trying to figure out, I've built this audience through the live streams that I'm incredibly grateful for, and their
Right.
conversations and their interaction. I'm so grateful for it. I love these people. I love talking to them. I love seeing how they share with each other, but cutting out the noise factor, the fact that I don't have a social media person. So everybody who writes me, you know, I don't have the emotional or time overhead
Right.
to respond in the way that's expected of me at this
Mhm.
point. You know, now that we're not in lockdown,
Right. Right.
I kind of can't do it. And so I'm failing at it, and I'm trying to figure out how to reorient other people's expectations and my own personal
Right.
expectations so that I'm not overwhelmed. And there is a part of that interaction that is a part of the job now, and I want to stay authentic and present. You know, it's almost related. Like, one of the things that built up Toad's fan base is that we would stay around outside the club after the show until every single person who wanted to say hi
Right.
could. So it would be 2 hours after the show in front of the bus, and we would talk to everybody. And that was one of the things we did to, you know, it's how we got our fan base. And we
Right.
kept doing that pretty much even after we got back together. And I remember I was getting divorced, and I started having panic attacks after the shows. Like, because you try to be there and actually be fully present. You've just done all the touring work, you played the show, you've done everything, and there's 2 more hours of trying to look people in the eye and actually be there,
Right. Right.
right? And not check out or go to sleep, and to
Right.
actually be there. And it takes a lot out of you. And I started just having like like I couldn't do it anymore. And you know, we started doing these VIP things, which felt terrible to me and exclusive at the beginning, but it's like, at the other hand, that's the people who really, really want to see you.
Yeah.
And there's the people who are walking out of the club who wouldn't have sought you out, but since you're there, they stay, right? And it kind of,
Right.
it makes it before the show when I'm not so tired. It makes it a little more limited. It helps
Yeah.
pay for the bus now that we don't make money selling records. And
Yeah.
you know, and so, and I don't hang out and talk to people after the shows anymore, and I sleep better, which means my voice is better, which means I play better, all of that. But in a
Yeah.
similar way with the internet, trying to find out, like, what is the effort that I want to put into that virtual world, and into remembering to post, and into, you know, being a good boy on the internet, and what's the energy I want to put into having a life and interacting with people in real time, in real space, in nature, in the world, or teaching people, or choir leading, or doing the things that fill me up, so that I can write better songs because I've been living a life in the real world instead of selling a false image of myself on the internet. And
Oh, makes sense.
I, as much as social media has become a tool that actually provided, I think, something very real and concrete in terms of community building with the live streams. Every time I turn on Facebook, in order to get to the live stream or figure stuff out, I got to filter out the trolley comments. I got to look at all the other shit of people going like, my perfect life. You know, here's me
Yeah.
from Bali. Like, I don't want to see that. I want to love my life right here instead of comparing myself to people promoting themselves.
Yeah.
And even looking at it, even going on Instagram and like, oh God, there's a reel, there's another, like, I'm addictive. So I
Yeah.
get caught by those things, and I'll find myself, all I wanted to do was see if there was a message if I had to respond to, and instead I'm caught by this addictive medium. And you know, which I guess I'm responsible for, but I have to go into it in order to use it. But honestly, if I were not a musician, I wouldn't have a single social media app on my phone. I fucking
Right.
hate it. It's destroyed democracy. It has increased intolerance. It has increased conspiracy theories and irrational thought, hatefulness, divisiveness. It is the worst fucking thing ever to happen to humanity. That's what I think of social media.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the Industrial Revolution and capitalism, those are also the worst things to happen to humanity. But
no, I mean, in a certain perspective, I can agree with you that yeah, like that for all the good things, all the, you know, getting people together that, you know, in a certain way that uh perhaps wouldn't get to know one another, or get to know about a culture or what have you, or getting to kind of hang out with your friends, even if you're all over the country or all over the world in a place, is kind of cool, you know. But you're right. The
yeah,
problem is that the evilness crept in pretty quickly and tends to give a like an 80-20 split on evil side, you know, unfortunately.
yeah. Well, and beyond that, while there is the good of knowing people in, you know, widening circles around the world, there's also a question of, you know, what does it take away from our involvement in our local world? We can feel that activism is reposting something as opposed to going in the street, doing canvassing, doing community organizing, you know, volunteering in town, right?
Yeah.
And we can have far-flung neighbors instead of walking out our doors and meeting the people in our neighborhood and becoming
Yeah.
closer to them. And so while there is something about it that is broader and in a certain way much easier, right?
Yeah.
It offers a type of engagement that is ultimately semi-passive. It's more like a video game, whereas getting to know your neighbors is difficult because they're not exactly like you. You have
Right.
to understand how you find your common ground, and, you know, forgive is too strong a word, and just accept the uncommon ground, the difference, and try to see
Right.
the person in there. You know, real life doesn't funnel you into people who are just like you. It
Yeah. Yeah.
doesn't funnel you into agree, and continue to show you things, right, as these algorithms work, that make you
Right.
angry about the other, whoever the other may be.
Right.
If you get to know your neighbor, you know, uh, it's a very different thing. So I think even in there, and I'm not saying I'm not, you know, I have this sitting next to me, I'm as susceptible as anyone, but
Right.
there is this cost in being physically, truly, mentally, emotionally engaged locally.
Yeah.
It takes our attention away from there. And I think the loss of that, you know, there are things, you know, the Arab Spring, like that was, you know, created by, it was an amazing thing. Wonderful, beautiful things have happened.
Right.
But, and I wouldn't trade the community that I was able to build during the live streams. I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Right.
These people are amazing. I love them. But it's a question of, now that we're out moving in the world again, what's the balance of online life with in-person life? And I find, for me, the more I am online, the more I am having FOMO, the more I am not engaged in my immediate surroundings. And that to me is the biggest loss, because that's really where life exists.
Yeah. I agree. Well, it's very astute, and yeah, I think we, you know, we're not getting rid of this anytime soon.
No.
So we have to be a little bit more aware of what it is, what it does, and how it affects
Yeah.
us. The idea that you just um, succumb to it, and just let it just rule you is poor thinking, in my opinion. Unfortunately, some people just say,
Yeah, but
well, it's here and I'm just letting it take me. It's like, well,
yeah, and it's a consciously manipulative thing. I mean, I think it's worth recognizing that, like, I was hearing on NPR yesterday, just Apple's new privacy rules for apps apparently have, in the first year, it cost Facebook or Meta something like $10 billion in revenue. That's how much spying on you is worth.
yeah,
And they're still spying on you. They just can't do it as much as they were.
right.
That's an incredible amount of money, $10 billion just by Apple changing their privacy policies.
Yeah.
Which is really frightening. Social media should, at its best, it should be the public square, and it should reward good conversation instead of being, once again, algorithmically designed to funnel you into like-minded people to see content that will make you as angry as possible so that you can bitch about it to each other. That's
That's why
thing.
that's why on Instagram I tend to like a lot of animal stuff, so I get
Yeah.
a lot of that.
You get nice animals. This is good. If you like puppies, it will give you puppies, even puppies that don't.
Well, I like a truly wide. I just watched a video of a prairie dog in a t-shirt or a shirt today, so that was very happy.
There you go. I can't argue with that. I used to, I mean, one of my favorite antidepressant devices was, Cute Overload back in the day.
Yeah.
If I was feeling bad, I would go straight to cuteoverload.com and I would just look at fuzzy animals and I would feel better.
I think we all need to kind of learn that more. And I think that's the problem with that is the problem with modern day society, and not to say in my day, because we're at that age where it's in my day, kind of thing. But
kids these days,
we were a generation that was wanting kind of, I mean, I'm not saying specifically you, but we were in love with Star Trek and Star Wars, and we it took all the new stuff we took in, VCRs and video games and cable, and it's like, we were the generation that really kind of were like, wanting this to, all to come to fruition in some ways. And now it's just, there's a whole generation that this is all they know. All they know is social media. And it's, at least with us, we didn't have it as kids, and I think that helps kind of, helps us figure out how to manage it. But when you're just born into it, and I know we've gone far astray from talking about you and your music.
No, it's fine. I get bored with me and my music.
But it just, it makes me sad that kids or young people don't have that time without it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I just worry about cognitive development. Like if you're handing a kid a screen at, 1 or less, and that's the first thing they're interacting with, that scares the shit out of me. But it's, also, like, I don't know, my kids grew up, I'm glad they were just old enough that they, missed the iPhone initially. Right. They're not social media addicts. They're not phone addicts. They're people who really love living in real life.
Yeah.
I also think as people face, especially girls, all the bullying, the shaming, the crappiness that happens online, a lot of them choose to say goodbye to it and to not engage.
That's good. That's
because it is often so toxic. So I there's always been, somebody turned me on recently to this little, quote from Socrates that's basically talking about kids these days. They don't respect their elders. They don't listen to their parents. They terrorize their teachers. Socrates, right? It's always been a story that we did
Yeah,
it
yeah.
right in my generation, and kids these days don't have it.
Yeah.
You know, but there are, you know, and it's hard to say, you know, with technology, it's like, I think there were opportunities for humanity to try to live within its means. And we've been able for the past couple hundred years to kind of, you know, use the machines of the gods to allow us to live in imbalance. And I don't live in balance. I consume more than I add. It's not sustainable, you know. It's and yeah, you know, I'm a hypocrite talking about any of it because I take place in this modern consumer society, but I also I don't know how you put it back in the box. And I feel like, you know, my job as an artist is to try to provide a degree of symptomatic relief that can hopefully remind people of how deeply they actually feel,
Yeah.
and take them out of the trance of distraction and you know, bad othering, of a lack of compassion or a lack of heart, just a numbness, right? And you know, I I understand, you know, maybe the difference between entertainment and art, and I think they can overlap, but to some degree entertainment can be something to take you away, whereas art is something that brings you in.
Mhm.
And entertainment can also be a hybrid, right? You can
Right.
be off in an adventure on another planet, and all of a sudden something poignant happens and you find yourself in tears because,
Yes.
you know, there's a great human question happening. So they're not mutually exclusive. And sometimes, I mean, for me, I'm a sci-fi buff. I love, you know, reading Alistair Reynolds and Adrian Tchaikovsky, and you know, I love hard sci-fi. But some of the reason I read that is it's not necessarily, you know, sci-fi works in metaphor. And so it still comes back to human relations, to human problems, to basic human issues. And, you know, it's still affecting. It's not just diversion. So I don't know what all that means. You know, once again, it's easy to cast stones. It's easy to complain about how things are.
Yeah.
And once again, I don't pretend to have any magical cures for anything. I don't know if the magical cures exist.
Well,
But
I certainly think there are a lot of people that have a lot of really good ideas. Unfortunately, we're in a point in our history, especially here in America, where reason will not will out. And because
yeah,
because we have a certain generation of people that are completely terrified of anything new and change, and uh,
yeah,
without getting into a whole rant, my parents' generation, maybe your parent, I guess we're about the same age. Your parents' generation, maybe not them specifically, but that generation has become worse than the generation that they protested against. I think in their day, in terms of intolerance and ruin and you know, other things. I don't know,
yeah.
but that's a whole
The
thing.
intolerance, the level of intolerance, and the bold-facedness of it is a pretty remarkable thing right now. A kind of, I think what I can understand in it is that historically, when things feel unstable, people want certainty. They want certain answers, and they don't want to be told, because I know I don't want to be told, that in order to make things better, that they will have to sacrifice their own personal comfort, which is
Right.
really, you know, what it comes down to.
Right.
You're going to have to expand your capacity to either be open or give up some of your, you know, creature comforts, so that others, you know, right, live simply so that others may simply live.
Yeah.
Hard for people to do, easy to
Well, and
talk
then
about.
there's the other thing where people, this whole class of people that don't have much of anything, or they don't have as much as they probably would like, and then they defend millionaires and billionaires and corporations and to not being, forced to give a little bit more.
Yeah, well, the easiest thing to do if you want to, distract, right, from the realities is to sick people on whoever's just below them on the ladder,
right,
whoever they're afraid is coming for what they have, instead of asking, like, why don't we have national health care?
right.
Why am I one medical problem away from
And
bankruptcy?
why is that? Why is national health care such a even a political thing? It's a social thing. It's
Social thing. It's also an economic thing.
right.
It makes for more stable economies if
Yeah,
you have people who aren't terrified.
right.
It really does. And it's these questions of, I mean, for me, it's things like that. It's like, why doesn't my wage pay for rent and food? Why
Right.
why don't my kids have a decent, all these questions, and then a refusal to have the wealthiest invest back into society. It's kind of a crazy thing. And then what you do is you point to immigrants who are less likely to commit crimes, work very hard, tend to be very
Well,
family
you
oriented.
point to
Like,
really, anybody that isn't just like you, whether it be black
yeah,
people, Hispanic people, the horrible thing that's been going on with Asian people and Jewish people in this country the last 5 to 10 years.
yeah.
It's like I keep thinking about my grandfather was a tank operator in World War II, and he fought to squash Nazism, hate.
Yeah.
I mean, my grandfather may not have been the the, the least racist person ever, but he was part of a generation that knew what was right and what was wrong in many ways, even though certainly there was a lot wrong in those generations too. But
Yeah, it
that's
was
what I'm saying.
complicated. It's always been complicated, and it will always be complicated.
It's just
and
that was something I thought we settled, that we don't appreciate Nazis.
These things move in waves, and also people look for openings as far as intolerance. I mean, the anti-trans laws in Florida, Georgia, I mean, they're hideous, and they're memes, these stories of like groomers. What about the children? Like, it's the same stuff that they were saying about gay people before Stonewall and after Stonewall. It's the same otherizing stories where there is literally nothing on the books about dangers to children. There's no reality to it whatsoever. It's a boogeyman, and it's taking out someone who is different than you that you don't understand. It's unthinkable, and don't think they'll stop with trans people.
No,
it's
a conversation. The thing is the decision is being made before the conversation happens, and nobody wants to have the conversation.
No, because if you had the conversation about what's actually a threat to children, you would have to look at youth pastors. And if you want to just look up on your own, just do like.
I'd rather avoid. I mean, I know I have a feeling, but it's not.
I will guarantee you there are multiple cases this week.
Oh, I'm sure, and I'm saying it's not. I got.
And those are the ones that come to light.
Yeah, and it's anything you look back on, the Cub Scouts or any organization that perhaps you and I in our time were told to fully embrace. They're men of God. Well, he's Jim. He's the scout leader, or John the priest. That whatever.
It's intense, and the cover-ups around all of that are shocking. I mean, but.
Well, this is a very hypocritical nation in many ways.
Oh yeah, I mean, God, we've got the guys passing this anti-trans. It's like, oh, and here's a picture of you in a dress, and the other guy is liking a sending hearts and fire to a young. It's like one of the other.
Well, there's always the
Republicans passing this legislation. It's like, by the way, your official Instagram account, you're like sending hot flames and smiles to this like sweet young 20-year-old twink, like awesome gay kid's fine. The hypocritical anti-gay
right
guy,
no it's just
come on, man.
I mean, think about all those Republicans that pushed for and passed legislation, you know, against gays, and were found in a bathroom stall with another man. It's like, well, it's always the thing that they either fear the most or that they really don't. They want to overcompensate because they don't want to be known for what they are.
It isn't always, but it very often is.
Yeah,
Like
it's a lot.
shockingly often, where basically if you see somebody screaming on a pulpit about how gay people are trying to, like, trust me, they're hiding something.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
and in the meantime, it's just breaking apart families. It's, you know, the danger in this
Dividing
is,
friends.
yeah, it's, you know, and I don't know how you fight those waves. I don't know how you fight them. Like it's some of it is just by talking about it, denormalizing it, because there's a creep. I think one of the things that, you know, the right is very good with, that the left is really fails at, is the control of language and the choosing of language, and
Unified
like
messaging.
they've been weaponizing words like grooming, which basically at this point they're equating with existing. Like that if you exist, you are grooming. Like
Right.
it's a shocking level of intolerance, and to see how quickly these draconian laws are coming in.
Well, the change that's enacted, I mean, the striking down of Roe versus Wade is still something I'm not even sure if I have fully accepted happened for some reason. It's like it was all my life that was pretty much one of the first, that was like the major law that came up around the time I was born. And to scale things back, I've never understood the idea of going backwards. But we have a whole society of people that don't believe in science, don't believe in, they don't trust anything. And the problem is, you can sit there and you can go back and understand why people stopped having faith in things, because people lied. You know, the government lied to a lot of people about a lot of things, and it just opened it up.
And to bring the conversation back from, you know, because I can do my liberal complaint list all day long. I mean, to get back to that's where I kind of try to ask better questions, and instead of just sitting there and thinking I got it all worked out. Right. I think there's a legitimacy. I think that people have lost their faith in institutions at great cost, at great personal cost. I think people have their trust has been injured. What I don't quite understand is how casually it seems that trust is put into places that are telling stories that are even more unbelievable, right?
Right.
It feels like there's a great personal cost to the loss of trust, but a little bit of like a casualness in where you put that trust after it's been lost.
Well, don't you
if
think
that makes sense? Meaning, like, if you're deciding, like, you know, doctors don't know everything, but then you go, so therefore every virologist and immunologist in the world is lying, and they're part of a giant, like, that requires such.
Then why do you go to the doctor
conspiratorial?
If you're sick?
Yeah, and doctors don't get everything right. They're often wrong.
We don't have it all
they are
figured
working
out.
And they are working very hard to be less wrong all the time, and to do
Right.
that in evidence-based ways. You know, it's but that doesn't mean, you know, somebody over there who's just invented their own brand of energy healing and crystal therapy, that doesn't mean that they are right, just because doctors are sometimes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't mean the doctors are trying to hurt you or are lying or in the pocket of pharmaceutical. Like, it's the degree of conspiracy required to think some of these things is a difficult thing. But I think to not respect the pain that people have experienced and how that would cause them to lose their faith, or how frightening the world is, and that people are seeking answers, people are seeking, you know, definitive answers. It's why fascism and intolerance are on the rise, when people are feeling insecure, They want somebody who says they know all the answers. And
Right.
it's sometimes amazing to see where that faith gets deposited. Once again, if you're looking for good, solid answers, and it's shocking sometimes who people will believe. And
Yes.
but they respond less to maybe the quality of the research or the answer itself than they do to the self-assuredness and the
Yes.
fact that somebody's
Yes.
just willing to say, I know with absolute certainty. And then, because
Exactly.
here's the weird thing about science, or policymakers, prognosticators of the future in that wonky way, or even I would say a good spiritual teacher, is none of them will tell you definitively this is absolutely the unvarnished truth and always will be, except possibly in the spiritual world. If you want to go into, like, my personal irrational belief system is that everything is held together by love. I don't want that disproven. I'll stick by it. I don't think it makes me stupider in other ways. But with any of that, like, what's God? God is the unknown. You can't know the mind of God. God is, the world of spirit, that world, so infinite, and you can't pin it. Science, we don't know shit. We're always trying to learn more, and science seeks to disprove itself. Science only seeks a proof by testing a hypothesis.
Right.
And you seek negative proof. You seek, if you have an idea, and I think some people don't get this about science, right? You have an idea, you try as hard as you can to disprove it. And if you can't disprove it, and if multiple studies can't disprove it, then it is thought to be true. But that's how you go about it. You don't just decide what you want to be true and only choose the proof that backs you up. That's not science. Yeah. Same with good policy. You have to say, we think this will work, and if the situation changes, we're going to change what we say the right thing is to do, but we're working on the best data we have now. You can't promise a false certainty. And
But people
can
don't like
understand
that.
how,
Yeah.
no, the human mind doesn't like that. And I don't think people are less worthy or bad because of that. I think people are susceptible to bad information, especially when it's accompanied with a story that makes them feel heroic and makes them feel like they have special secret knowledge, or makes them feel better about who they are. I understand the susceptibility, and I am sure that there are places in my life. This is the thing that terrifies me, is I am sure there are places in my life where I'm doing the same thing that I am blind to now, that I will have my eyes opened to later. But I have the attitude, at the very least, that I would like to not be deluded, and that I realize it's this thing about, there's a lot of psychology on this, that people know that we have confirmation bias, that confirmation bias is this universal human trait. We want to be the hero in the story. We want to be right. We want to have the information that we want to be right, be good. Every single person does this. And also every single person thinks that they are less susceptible to confirmation bias than other people are. Right. So right. We all know that everybody does it, but we all think we're a little better, and we're not.
Well, and that's true. I was just about to, I was just in my head, I was thinking, I will say that I do my best to not think that way. But my thing is, if I legitimately don't know something, I will own up to the fact that I don't know that for sure. Maybe I can look into it, but, or maybe you tell me what you think. I try not to have, such a black or white on everything. There are certain things, that have crept back up in the last 10 years that I have pretty definitive opinions on. But that's in terms of people being hateful or violent and things like that, which shouldn't really be a real question on, in my opinion.
And I have to find, the hard thing for me in this last period of time has been, in my response to what I view as intolerance or hate speech, is what is the tone of my response to that? And so even, the tone of like our earlier conversation, when you're just working on the problem and they're doing this, they're doing that, and there is a fact of that, and that intolerance does have to be spoken sharply back to. And at the same time, if you're demonizing those people, you're committing not precisely the same sin, but something adjacent to it.
Right.
And so how do you answer to injustice and intolerance and also maintain compassion and openness, and not meaning holding water for bigots, but understanding that there's some damage to the soul that has made people afraid of the other,
Right.
and not writing them off, and that's a hard line to walk.
Well, that's especially difficult nowadays when people, have gotten to the point where if somebody steps out of line on anything, even if it could be considered minor, there's this immediate backlash. And I was saying this yesterday about a silly one of those silly, stupid articles that takes something somebody says and extrapolates it into something else that's not, and it's put into a headline that's misleading. So the whole thing is to, going back to social media, is to get all this anger going on social media, to click on the link, to scroll through it so that ads appear on the sides or in front of you or whatever the hell, so that monetizes the site. And in the end, the article basically says nothing or contains false information. Yeah. So it's done all of this, like a bullet going through a body. It's torn up all this stuff simply so you could make a few bucks, kind of thing. Yeah. And it doesn't help anything. And I'm trying, as I go on to social media, when I see these sorts of sites, it can even, like, I'm a big superhero film fan, so obviously I will click on links and stuff that deal with superheroes and stuff. So, but then I get these sites that they start saying things that are, this isn't even necessarily negative. It's just BS. They just make up their own idea that so-and-so got signed to play so-and-so. And it's like, well, you're a site I've never heard of before. How is it Hollywood Reporter isn't the one reporting this? Like, why would you have this? Yeah. And because it's BS. They're just throwing up BS to get people to click on.
They're selling ads.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of it. It's a big ad machine. And I think we have to realize, getting free information on the net, you always have to remember that they're selling clicks. Right. Pretty much every place is selling clicks. So yeah, and if you click through because they have a headline that seems incendiary or interesting or exclusive, you're probably, and especially if it's telling you a story you like and want to hear, you're not going to ask if it's true or not. And there's a lot of sharing of headlines without reading. And I pretty much no longer share any news on social media. And I have made the mistake once or twice of sharing something that all my emotional reaction went like, yeah, that's true. And that I immediately found out after, if with a couple more clicks, was absolute bullshit.
Yeah.
Who hasn't at what time
spread information? Because you're sitting there passively looking at your damn phone, and you're just like, oh, I'm outraged in this moment. Okay, I'll share it and share my outrage, and I get it out of my system. But it's the thing that people don't think about, and this has really gotten into some weird psychology stuff here, but they don't think about the fact that you're perpetuating, the pain and the sadness and the suffering of everyone by blindly sharing something and not actually doing anything on your own to see what the truth is.
Yeah, at the bare minimum, because reposting, even that, I don't know if, even if it's accurate, I don't know if it always helps. But certainly reading an article through before you post it, and then doing a couple of clicks to see if they're acting like there's anything in factual basis, to see if that is actually true, right?
Yeah. Well, and also you have to look at, and God, again, there are certain places where you can, for the most part, maybe not get a completely unbiased story, but you'll get as close to it as possible compared to other places where it's like, 75-25 bias wins over
Well, I think
over
people
facts.
admitting bias is a huge thing.
Yeah.
I think people on the right, there's the whole Jordan Peterson is, I'm a liberal, but I'm only talking in a right wing, in a right wing vortex.
Right.
He's not a liberal. He's hardcore right, which is fine. It's just, it would be great if he was actually honest about what and who he is.
Right.
So there is this, I've had a friend go like, Brett Weinstein, like he's, I don't just listen to right-wing people. I listen to some lefties too, like Brett Weinstein. It's like, oh my God, you're
I'm not even sure who that is.
He's a long story in
But
anti-wokeness,
yeah.
Whatever they call it, dark horse kind of aggrieved anti-woke people. But it's a strange time. I mean, it's knowing what the information is that you're getting, what the bias is, and I think also honestly trying to vet them for journalistic standards. And it's a question, do you do fact checking? It's harder and harder. Journalism is yet another thing that has been really hit hard economically by new technologies, and it requires fact checking to do real journalism. And if things aren't fact checked, for me, that's a big thing. Do people print retractions? Do they admit when they're wrong?
Well, there's the urge to crucify people, and then when they're found to not be found, when some, like, the case turns in some way. Somebody, I think about somebody I interviewed a couple times. Tom Sizemore was accused of inappropriately touching some young girl on a set that he had on his lap, and he maintained, not to, he didn't talk, he and I didn't talk about this. He maintained outwardly that he didn't intentionally do anything. There wasn't anything overt or any, if he, like, say, grabbed her by the chest area or something, that it was because he was putting her on his lap, or whatever the deal was. But this person ended up getting multiple suits tossed out because there just wasn't anything. They didn't present enough of anything to actually get to a move on date, and anything. And the stating of that, even when he passed away, there was still, that was mentioned in it. It's like, well, you don't have to actually mention that, because if it never was proven, you know what I mean? You're kind of like sullying somebody's name for no apparent reason. But there was, nobody gets as much press, kind of, uh, why am I flipping on the word here? Basically proving that they, saying that they were, proved innocent, or that, the case was thrown out or whatever. Then there was the lead up to, oh, this has happened. This is what's.
And there's a pendulum swing in there that is also, there is an amount of collateral damage, and there's also a readjustment from years and years and years, decades, if not centuries, of boys will be boys, and getting away with murder.
Totally agree.
And so it's a hard one. It's a really difficult one, because there is such a history and such a nuance to it. And
no, I don't even mean those. I'm just talking about, like, anyone that goes through the process. Vindication was basically the word I was getting at. There's a lot of juice in the reporting of whatever may be. There's not as much juice in vindicating someone publicly.
It's true. And we are definitely quick to attack, and the court of public opinion is incredibly powerful.
But again, with going, what I was trying to get at with the thing, story about the news and social media was that it's all like a feeding thing. You know, it's yeah, it's anyways, sorry.
No, it's okay. We're off the ranch now.
Yeah,
We should
yeah,
bring
no,
it back in and
the
probably wrap
wheels
up
are off
sometime
and
soon.
we're basically driving on the axle.
Well, and it's you know, I've heard people call it's the conversation, which
Yeah,
is how do you make sense of this kind of mess we find ourselves in? And it's that combination of not getting lost in the smaller narratives, the stuff that really annoys you, like and also not shutting your eyes to it.
yeah,
It's hard to find that balance. And you know, that question, I just finished this book called 4,000 Weeks, which is
okay.
like this great productivity book. Basically saying that your life is short. You got about 4,000 weeks on average to live. And you're probably not going to be remembered, and you're not going to get everything done you want to do. You're not even going to get everything you really want to do done. So you should probably concentrate on the shit you really love, that you really feel matters, that feels like it gives your life meaning. Like,
Yeah.
show up for the people you love, show up for the activities that you love, be present as much as you can in the moment, because it could end at any second. You don't have a past, you don't have a future, you have now, you don't have a legacy. Like, let it fucking go.
Right.
I've been thinking a lot about that. And so there is that thing of like, what do you do in the moment, which is where it comes back to be present for the people who are right in front of you. Try to be loving, try to model kindness and tolerance.
Yeah.
You know, the best teachers I've ever had are not the ones who gave the fieriest sermons, but the ones who just kind of showed up as they were and did
Yeah.
the work that was right in front of them and did it with like kindness and vulnerability. You know, it's not a massively profound thing. It's and I think we want fiery chariots, and the reality is that we, you know, have, you know, pieces of dirt with things growing out of them. It's not, you know, where, you know, and we want to be once again like part of some amazing life-changing drama. And it's really I don't know, you know, it's not so much a cosmic battle as just a day-to-day, you know, effort to do something decent. So bringing it back in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and I think it's a good time to stop. We've gone way over what I thought we were going to go, so I appreciate you indulging, I guess, this road we traveled down. But
All good.
Glenn, it was a pleasure talking to you. Your latest solo album is on Compass Records. Toad the Wet Sprocket is going on tour this summer. You're playing Evanston Space, which is just outside of Chicago. I don't know if you've ever played there before, but it's an awesome
Oh yeah.
theater. Okay, yeah,
I
you
think,
know.
are we at Space, or I thought it was a different
It was
venue
Space.
actually.
It was Space. You might be
Toad?
somewhere else, but I remember
It's,
seeing Space.
I think Space is promoting it, but I don't think it's
Oh,
actually
all right, hold on.
there.
Hold on. Instant fact check.
Wait a minute.
Dead air.
It's at the is that at Con Auditorium?
What is it? I've never heard of that here outside of Chicago.
Well,
Hold on. I'm on the site. Right.
yeah, Con Auditorium.
Oh, here we go.
CAHN, not like Con. Yeah,
What date?
June 28th. So there you go.
Oh, you're right. I've never heard of
Yeah.
that place.
Well, there you go. It's on Sheridan and Emerson,
Yeah.
right next to the Delta Gamma sorority in Scott Hall.
Wow, you got that figured out pretty quick. All right.
There you go.
So there you go. The Con, not Wrath of Con or James Con. The Con Auditorium, Evanston, June 28th. They're going to be
Wait,
somewhere else near you.
do you know a James Caan? I'm curious. Who is?
Jimmy Con, the actor?
Oh, Yeah, it's not the one I was thinking of. I know a James Caan in Santa Barbara who I met, who's, I just have to do this. If you're a nerd, you will really appreciate
Okay, go
this.
ahead.
I met him kind of through singing circles. He's this great guy. He's a doctor. He's like a retired physician, but he also he just made an album of like environmentally based sea shanties. He's a
Intriguing.
really fun songwriter. So he's a songwriter, doctor, also screenwriter and novelist, but also like back in the day wrote, among other things, the novelization. He did a lot of film novelizations,
Okay.
including God, why am I remembering? A New Hope. What was the third one? Return of the Jedi.
Okay, I was like, what? I wasn't
He
sure if you
wrote
were
the book
talking
version
Star.
of Return of the Jedi. I read that.
Oh, the not like the book version.
The novelized
Yeah,
version
yeah,
of it.
yeah. Okay, cool. Oh wow.
Also by James Caan, but a
I might
different
have
James
actually.
Caan.
I gotta be honest. I might have owned that because I bought anything Star Wars back in the day.
Oh yeah, I think he did some Spielberg too. I think he might have done Poltergeist or something. But like
Interesting.
it was this bizarre thing, like meeting him and then looking at his bookshelf and just going like, why do you have the novelization of like Return of the Jedi? And it's like, oh my God, you wrote that? Anyway,
Yeah.
he's a
Well,
cool guy.
God, those novelizations were cool because sometimes you'd come across one and there'd be a bunch of stuff that wasn't in the movie, and you're like, oh, they must have been basing this off the original script then.
Yeah, well, that's the weird one. It's like, did they? Yeah, are those the scenes that got cut out? Yeah, he did
Yeah.
Poltergeist 2, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Goonies, and Return of the Jedi.
Wow,
Pretty cool.
that is pretty cool. All right, well, shout out to James Caan, the multi hyphenate out there.
Yeah.
And again, Con Auditorium, Evanston, June 28th. Toad the Wet Sprocket will be on tour all summer long. So go check them out and be sure to keep an eye out for Glenn performing solo. Again,
Awesome.
thank you very much for your time today,
Yeah,
Glenn. I
thank you.
appreciate
I'll
it.
see you later.
All right,
Thanks.
bye.